And here we are. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Pete Najarian, and John Najarian definitely looks a lot different, doesn't he? I mean, there's just something about what happens on that New York Stock Exchange floor. He looks so professional. Well, wait a minute. Marc LoPresti once again is with us. You look great, Marc. How does it look down there at the New York Stock Exchange?
Well, I'll tell you what, Pete, this is such an iconic location. As some folks know, I actually started my career here. I was a runner on the floor of this exchange when I was just a tender 18 years old. And back then, we traded in fractions. We used a pen and paper. You could still smoke cigarettes on the floor of the exchange. A lot has changed, and I won't say how much time has transpired because I don't look that old. But I'm very happy to be here live from the floor of New York, thanks to our friends at thestreet.com, Post 35, right here where it all happens.
Post 35 is where it starts and ends. That's where it happens. You're right about that. And I'll tell you what, the difference between you and I is I got there a little bit later. I was almost 30 years old when I got from football over onto the Chicago Board Options Exchange. They weren't smoking cigarettes, but they smoked something else oftentimes on the floor there, Marc. I can tell you that. It's the only way they could get through the day. But it was still fractions, and it was no computers. It was none of that. And when you wanted to make a stock trade, you know what you did? You had to pick up a phone, call a guy on the other side of the building, who then would go to New York. New York would call back, and then you could get your fill. It's pretty practical way to do it, right? Only about a 5 or 6 minute lag time.
Yep. and somewhere in the middle, somebody was standing at one of what we call specialist posts here, as you see over my left shoulder, where they would actually be communicating verbally, open outcry, as it's called, with the market makers. It was an incredible experience. I was privileged to catch the last golden age of stock trading here on the floor. But Pete, we got a lot to tell our fans about today. So let's jump in first with the Macro Minute.
Macro Minute. Let's go. You got it, man. Go get after it.
Macro Minute. So listen, we love to look at what the smart money's doing. It's something that Market Rebellion talks about a lot. Their live courses on these programs. So we look at the measure of leverage being utilized by hedge funds as one of the indications of how the smart money is lining up to take advantage of these emerging conditions in the marketplace. And a report that came out yesterday, Pete, from Goldman Sachs, that surveyed over $2.3 trillion in total assets under management among hedge funds, indicated that there is a approaching all-time high level of leverage that is being set up. That means these guys are getting ready to buy. It forebodes good things, bullish signals for individual stocks. And again, that's one of the things we watch, how the smart money is positioning to take advantage of these markets. Hedge fund leverage, almost all-time high.
And I'll tell you what, just to piggyback a little bit of that, Marc, I will say this. Mike Wilson over at Morgan Stanley has talked about this at nauseum, and boy, has he been right. Everybody wanted to push against him, but Mike talked about the first quarter of the year being very difficult, a very trying time. And as we get deeper into 2023, things start to look a lot more positive. That's almost exactly what you're talking about there with the leverage side of things. I would also say this. We started off the day by getting saved by Nvidia, but that only lasted so long because then the dollar started to go right back up again. You take a look over at the 10-year. It's not too far anymore, Marc, from getting back to 4. The combination of that usually does have people putting their hands out, at least in the near term, and that's what we're seeing, a little bit of selling from the top of the early morning to where we are now. So let's start right away. I mentioned Nvidia. Let's get after it. Let's talk about Nvidia and why were they so important? Well, the stock had a pretty nice jump last night in the after hours, Marc, 225. That was the area where it got today. It got up to 238 and change, and then started to ease back with the markets just a little bit. But that alone pulled the markets up. I'm convinced of that. People look, it used to be Apple. It might still be Apple, but Nvidia is right there right now. When people are looking, it was driving the NASDAQ to the upside. It was pulling the entire market, I think, to the upside for all the right reasons, by the way. They had some incredibly huge sales numbers. They actually forecast out there that their sales numbers are going to continue to get even better. But the big thing that really I took away from the entire thing, and we've talked about it here many times, AI. They talked about how that is what's driving Nvidia right now. And AI is king. And who's the king of AI? It's Nvidia. What do you think, Marc?
Well, listen, I think it's really interesting, first of all, how the generative AI story jumped the shark from the VC world to the public market world in like 15 seconds. That one caught me by surprise. I actually think the fundamental strength in NVIDIA's price movement and what we heard out of earnings is the growth in their data center business, posting double-digit 11% year-over-year growth. We always talk, Pete, about the value of data infrastructure. That's a sector that's going to continue to explode as we proliferate and create data every single day. I think the AI story, icing on the cake, forward thinking. It's not today, it's forward thinking, but definitely is helping. And it is a market moving stock, no doubt whatsoever.
So now we're going to jump to Bumble. And when we jump to Bumble, I'd like to say that AI kind of goes a little bit with Bumble. And I'll tell you why. This is a dating app. We're talking about artificial intelligence. You can kind of see where I'm going here. There is a growth area there right now. And where else are they growing? Well, the paid subs over at Bumble are absolutely crushing it right now. And that did help the company. Their revenue is just off the charts. It's a growth of about 19%. And then they focused on the guidance going forward, 16 to 19%. A lot of reasons to be pretty excited about this stock. And some of the competitors have given up much worse numbers than what we're seeing here. These numbers are great. Some of the competitors weren't able to put up anything close to this. So is Bumble the one that's leading? They absolutely are right now. They jumped almost all the way up to 25.75 today, just short of that, Mark. But then they pulled back a little bit with the markets, understandably so. What do you think about this one?
Well, Bumble's competitive advantage, and I'm going to give a shout out to all the single ladies out there. Bumble's competitive advantage is it puts the women in charge. They are the ones who decide who they swipe right and left on. They are the ones that decide whether they want to get an onslaught of messages from creepy dudes. There's something that is working there. And listen, the desire to date, cuffing season's almost over, but spring is in the air and love is in the air again after we just came off of Valentine's Day. It's a recession-proof industry, right? People want to get together regardless if the market's up or down. Bumble is definitely kicking the butts of its competitors. I expect it to continue.
They're doing it. And you're right. I mean, if there's any area that there maybe is a little bit of a recession proof, it might be that dating area, because you know what? People are always looking for something to put a smile on their face while they're going through the life when things aren't so great with the recession.
That's right.
That's one of the areas that it does, right? Next, we're going to hit Etsy. Now, Etsy is another one that's interesting because these guys, Mark, put up record numbers. And I don't know how many people would have thought that going in, but their revenue was $807 million. They were looking for 753. So that's a big number. It's a big beat. The protective algorithms that they've got, trying to keep away with some of the phony things that are out there and this, that, and the other. I think that's beneficial as well. The stock reaction's not great. Actually, the stock was down at least 2% early, but I felt like they actually put up a pretty damn good quarter. This would be one of those names where I might take a little bit of a peek at it if it starts to sell off a little too much, because I think they are in the sweet spot right now.
Yeah, listen, I don't disagree. They've definitely shown perseverance in the business model. They've shown fairly consistent growth in refining it and not just having an ad spend component to it as so many of their competitors. A little bit surprised to see the street's reaction to these very good numbers. But I think, Pete, it speaks to the larger sort of yin yang, right, of what's really going on with the American consumer. We see so much strength in certain names and in certain sectors, and then you have disappointing numbers coming out of names like the big box retailers in Home Depot, the Lowe's the other day. So definitely a little bit of a confusing picture, and I think that's part of what we saw and why the street's giving up some of those gains we saw in Etsy.
I'll tell you what, and lastly, we're going to finish up with these individual names with Lucid. Now, this is a name that had some promise early on. They still have a fantastic balance sheet, but Mark, they continue to disappoint, which is why the stock is a heck of a lot closer to the 52-week lows than it is the 52-week highs. And this is a problem because they're now single digits. We're talking about an $8 stock. Their revenue growth well below what everybody was looking for. But I think the bigger problem was, hey, what's going on right now with the idea of what these guys are doing from a delivery standpoint? They thought their deliveries would be much, much higher. They were not. They projected again for them to be higher. Are they going to be able to actually reach some of those levels? I think that is the problem right now for these guys. They have not been able to get through the pandemic the same way that Tesla and some of the others have been able to navigate. And I think that's what's killing Lucid. They got money though, Mark, so they can keep riding this thing a little longer. And by the way, I will say this, that car, the Air that they've got out there, that thing's pretty badass, man.
Yeah, you know, it is. It's a nice looking vehicle. This was a big disappointment for me, Pete, because this is one that I covered on our Bulls, Bears, and Blockchain show and our Monday morning show. I was hoping that this name would actually deliver a lot better than it did, because when you look at how they did in Q4, they actually exceeded their manufacturing goals, not only for the fourth quarter, but for all of 2022, manufacturing almost 3,500 vehicles in the fourth quarter, which was a record, and 53% more cars than they did on a year-over-year basis. So it looked really good. Customer orders versus cancellations, that balance improving, something we look at really, really carefully, looking at the data, right, by the way, on that particular metric. But they just keep losing money and losing money. But the stock is starting to look cheap. I'm going to keep an eye on this one, and I might look to pick some up if it keeps getting battered.
Yeah, I'd love to see them finally deliver with some of those deliveries. Anyway,
That's
now
right.
we're going to move on to the unusual option activity. Mark, I'm going to kick it off with American Airlines. And why am I seeing the option paper I'm seeing? Well, they're very, very bullish. The stock was trading about 15 and a half, give or take. The 52-week range is 11 to 21. We're sitting smack dab in the middle. I would say this about it, however. Have you bought tickets recently on a commercial airline? I know you travel privately a lot, but I have. I have. I'm just joking with you. But I'll tell you what, Mark, the numbers are extraordinary. I mean, I'm looking at numbers, whether it's Delta, American, United, doesn't really matter right now. They are up in the atmosphere of
Yeah.
way above us, in the stratosphere. It's unbelievable how high these prices have gotten. Well, that's damn good for at least right now. Somebody's out there saying, you know what, we think this next quarter might be not so bad either. 33,000 of the April 17 calls were bought today for about 60 cents. As a matter of fact, there was a single print, Mark, of that 33,000, a single print. 27,000 was bought in a single print. That's some big numbers that are coming in, looking for a little bit of upside in American. It makes some sense. It feels like they've got leverage right now, along with the rest of the airline. So we'll see how that pans out. But I certainly loved seeing this option paper. This is something where, could it go above 17? It seems likely that it certainly could.
Yeah, that's a big print and a big bull bet on American Airlines. I think, Pete, it's a continuation of the resilience of travel, both in the consumer and the business sector. We saw it with Airbnb's numbers last week. We saw it with Marriott's numbers last week. We saw it coming out of Delta CEO Ed Bastian's comments on how he thinks 2023 is going to be a rip-roaring year for the airline. The consumer and the business traveler has not let up. I don't know how much longer that's going to last, but for now, holy cow, the Bulls are in charge.
Yeah. All right. So next, we've got Microsoft, Mark, and I know you've got some thoughts on this one. If you want me, I can highlight what the numbers were, but they bought 8,000 of the March 3rd expiring 265s. And they paid about $1, a little bit more. Stock has pulled back with the market from the point in time when they did this. I still like this trade, and I think you do as well.
Yeah, no, listen, I definitely like this trade, and I look at really sort of three things, right? One, this was definitely some NVIDIA-related tailwinds that were helping to propel the stock, at least before the market turned a little bit, just before we went on the air. Number two, they are considered the leader in this generative AI chat GPT. Microsoft famously $10 billion bet on where that sector's going. So I think that was helped not only by NVIDIA's news, but folks continuing to bet bullishly on Microsoft as being a leader there. And then the third piece of that puzzle, Pete, by my estimation, not talked about as much, but the rumor, the whisper is that the FTC is starting to look a bit more favorably on Microsoft's acquisition of Activision. And we saw some indications of that with Call of Duty announcing coming over to the Microsoft platform. That is a big BFD, as we call it here on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, a big effing deal if that comes through, and it's looking better every day. I like this trade. I like Microsoft. I'm a Microsoft bull at these levels.
All right. And I love it. I agree with you. I'll tell you what, Mark, I give the floor to you. I think you've got something to tell us about right now.
Well, I do, but we have our Venture Minute today, and we are proud to be featuring a company called Wejo, W-E-J-O. This is a company that is in the data infrastructure space. And we talk about data a lot, but this is part of why it's so damn important. This company has the ability to, through license agreements with OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, the people that make your cars, to get the data that is generated by everything that your car does and that you do in your car. That's really, really important because that data is then curated, refined, and sold both back to the auto manufacturers to make improvements in their cars, vehicle safety, and others, but also to municipalities for improving traffic conditions, city planning, health and safety, emergency response management, and things like that. These guys are the leader in that space. Yesterday, announcing another partnership with Renault, one of the big auto original equipment manufacturers out of Europe. We're expecting to see some additional announcements of further partnerships like that as days come on. This is a NASDAQ-listed company. WEJO is the symbol. To learn more, go to www.wejo.com to understand how they are leading in vehicle mobility data.
Appreciate that, Mark. That's outstanding. I love when you guys highlight these because a lot of people don't know a lot of these types of names, right? I mean, they're somewhere out there and they don't know. And it's great that you guys are able to highlight it, give people the opportunity to look it up and hear what you have to say about it. It's fantastic. All right. Lastly, we got the sports in front of us now. I know you're excited about this one, Mark. I know you're excited about girls basketball, but here's why we all should be, right? I mean, South Carolina women's basketball is absolutely on fire. These gals are 27-0. I mean, it's
number one.
Yeah, they are number one. And they also, as they're sitting up there undefeated with a couple of games still left to play, these gals have already gone over 100 points in 2 games this year. The point differential that they've got, how much they score versus anybody else against them, is number 1 in the country. They have the most blocks of anybody in the country. So every aspect of what they do is incredible. Dawn Staley is the coach. She was a first-round draft pick herself out of Virginia back in the day for the WNBA. I will say this, she took over at this program and has turned South Carolina into a power. She's already got 2 national titles, one of them coming last year against what used to be the king or queen, if you want to call it that way. But when you look at UConn, they were always the winner, right? I mean, every year we talk about Gino and what he's done up there. Well, those days are kind of in the past because you take a look at South Carolina and what they've been able to accomplish. They've got 2 players specifically, Mark. They've got Zia Cook and Aliyah Boston. Now, these 2 players have started every single game since they came on the campus of South Carolina. They're now both seniors, and they have not missed a game, and they started every single game. Although Aliyah did miss 1 game as a starter, but actually played in that game as well. So outside of that, just an unbelievable record that they've got. They continue to dominate. What do you think about this? I mean, we all see it occasionally, probably not until they get to the tournament and stuff like that. But, you know, women's basketball, these ladies shoot the ball better than the men. I mean, it's absolutely amazing how they shoot from three-point land.
Well, women are supposed to have better aim than men in general, Pete, so that doesn't necessarily surprise me. I'm curious if the meteoric rise to prominence of this team is going to have an impact on this whole name, image, likeness thing, right? If it's actually going to start to come in to women's college basketball. If it hasn't already, you're better informed than I am on this stuff. But it sounds to me like a team that is doing so well, so quickly, with such unbelievable points, 100 points per game, twice in a row. I think you indicated you might start to see that creep in.
Yeah, interesting. And there is NIL there, by the way. A young gal from Minnesota who plays at UConn has probably got the highest number. I'm not 100% sure on that, but she got some huge money on NIL because she is absolutely unbelievable basketball player. All right, next we're going to go to the second one. The University of Colorado and what Primetime has done, Primetime being Deion Sanders. Mark, the turnaround that this school may have taken, it could be unbelievably fast because they were arguably one of the worst programs in all of college football a year ago. They fired the coach. We both know John's daughter goes to school there. They only beat 1 team all year, unfortunately for John and I, because of our ties to Cal Berkeley. It was the Cal Berkeley Bears. They beat them at Colorado. But other than that, they were pretty bad. They just couldn't get it together, and they'd been in a bad spiral for a while. fast forward to this offseason, Deion Sanders takes over as the head coach. He literally did say, hey, I'm going to try to run guys off. And the reason he said that was he wants guys that want it. They're not going to quit, right? And that's what he was going for. So he's lost a couple players who left, but here's where he's winning. He has the number 1 ranked portal acquisition of players of all the schools in the country this year. He is number 1. So they've got themselves a bit of a momentum going off of that, Mark, that could be pretty daggone interesting. By the way, they signed a new cornerback who's unbelievable, a linebacker from Alabama, pretty damn good, a safety from Arkansas, a D lineman from Fresno State, and 17 others. So they have gone out and bought, and not bought, but they have brought in guys that could really turn the program. And the closest thing I could compare it to is the previous year, USC did the exact same thing. And USC's coach turned the corner for him. So it might happen for Deion, but what do you think? Do you think they've got a shot? Because they got to go up against Oregon, SC, Stanford, Washington State, Oregon State, all those great programs. What do you think?
It's certainly a lot of stiff competition for Colorado, but if anybody can do what we would call around here a restructuring, it's Deion, and it sounds like he's stacking the board, stacking the bench with some real hitters that can make it happen for Colorado. So we're going to be very interested to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I can't wait. I want to watch that. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. We know that John is off and about and skiing down hills, or maybe he's having a drink somewhere or something. Yesterday, Mark, he came on with some sort of cocktail as he was going through the whole thing. So I think he's enjoying himself pretty nicely over in Italy or wherever he is.
This is Coca-Cola, right? Just for the record. They do not allow drinking on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
I'm not buying that. Anyway, Mark, thanks again, and we'll look forward to it. And when John's out and you're in, you know what? We may even stepped it up a notch or so. Maybe, who knows? You didn't hear that from me, though. Have a great day, and thanks a lot, Mark. We really appreciate it, and thanks for watching.
Introducing our new series of intimate in-person trading conferences in some of the greatest cities in America. It's Market Rebellion Live. Next up, this June in Sonoma County, California. Savor some of the finest wines in America while you level up your trading with Pete Najarian, John Najarian, AJ Monty, Ryan Mastro, and Bill Johnson. Sonoma is limited to just 25 seats to ensure every guest gets personal attention, so act now. Tickets are going fast.